The silence inside the Sterling estate was heavy, the kind of oppressive quiet that only money could buy. At 2 a.m., the sprawling mansion in the hills of Aspen was supposed to be asleep, wrapped in the comfort of radiant floor heating and triple-paned glass. But Elena couldn't sleep. As the new living housekeeper, she was still adjusting to the strange, sterile atmosphere of the house. But tonight, it wasn't the unfamiliar bed keeping her awake. It was the sound. For the third night in a row, she heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching coming from the downstairs west wing, near the service entrance and the sunroom. Elena tightened the sash of her robe, her breath already hitching in her throat as she stepped into the hallway. The air here smelled of expensive cedar and lemon oil, a stark contrast to the smell of bleach she carried on her hands all day. She moved like a ghost, her soft-soled slippers making no sound on the polished marble. In the world of invisible staff, silence was the primary currency. You were seen only when summoned, and heard never. She reached the bottom of the grand staircase, the moonlight filtering through the high windows and casting long, skeletal shadows across the foyer. The scratching sound grew louder, accompanied now by a low, desperate whimper. It sounded like a dog trapped outside, but the Sterlings didn't own a dog. Mr. Sterling, the town's beloved philanthropist and Father of the Year award winner, claimed to be allergic to anything that shed. Elena navigated the darkness toward the sunroom. This area was technically off-limits after hours, reserved for Marcus Sterling's evening cigars, but the whimpering was tugging at her chest. It was too human. She reached the heavy oak door that led to the unheated glass-enclosed porch. Through the panes, she could see the swirling snow of the blizzard outside. The temperature dropped significantly just standing near the glass. She squinted, pressing her face close to the cold surface, trying to make sense of the shape huddled in the corner of the porch. Her heart stopped. It wasn't an animal. It was a small boy, curled into a tight ball on a thin, woven patio mat. He was wearing flannel pajamas that looked far too thin for the biting Colorado winter, his knees pulled up to his chin, his small body shaking so violently that his teeth chattered with a sound that echoed through the glass. "Leo?" she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. It was the Sterlings' adopted son, 7 years old. The boy who was paraded in front of cameras at charity galas, the poster child for Marcus Sterling's benevolence. Elena fumbled with the lock, her fingers trembling. "Oh my God, Leo, hold on," she hissed, panic overriding her training. The brass deadbolt was cold and stiff. She twisted it, hearing the heavy thunk of the mechanism releasing. She threw the door open. A gust of freezing wind slapped her face, carrying snow into the warmth of the house. "Leo, come inside, baby, come inside!" The boy looked up, his eyes wide with terror. But he didn't move toward the warmth. He scrambled backward, pressing himself harder against the frozen brick wall of the porch. "No," Leo rasped, his voice hoarse from crying. "No, Elena, don't. He'll reset the timer. He said the timer doesn't stop if I come in." "What timer? Leo, you're freezing." Elena stepped out onto the porch, the cold instantly piercing her robe. She reached for him, grabbing his ice-cold arm to pull him up. Suddenly, the floodlights blinded her. The backyard motion sensors hadn't triggered them. Someone had flipped a switch from inside. Elena spun around, shielding her eyes against the glare. Standing in the doorway she had just opened, silhouetted against the warm, golden light of the hallway, was Marcus Sterling. He was wearing a cashmere robe, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, and a look of calm, terrifying disappointment on his face. He didn't yell. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had found a stain on his favorite shirt. "Elena?" Marcus said, his voice smooth and low, barely rising above the sound of the wind. "You're letting the heat out."
Elena didn't answer him. She didn't care about the heat or the bill or the open door. The maternal instinct that had been dormant for so long roared to life, overriding the submissiveness required by her uniform. She scooped Leo up, shocked by how light he was. He was a bundle of shivering bones and ice-cold flannel in her arms. "He's hypothermic, Mr. Sterling," Elena said, her voice shaking not from the cold, but from a potent mix of rage and adrenaline. She stepped past Marcus, moving into the hallway and kicking the heavy door shut behind her. The click of the latch echoed like a gunshot in the silent house. Marcus didn't move out of her way. He simply took a sip of his drink, his eyes tracking the snow melting off Leo's pajamas and dripping onto the pristine hardwood floor. "Put him down, Elena," Marcus said. His tone was conversational, bored even. "Leo is in the middle of a character-building exercise. You are interrupting." "Character building?" Elena tightened her grip on the boy. Leo was burying his face in her shoulder, sobbing silently, his tears hot against her neck. "He's 7 years old. It's 10 degrees outside. This isn't discipline. This is torture." Marcus sighed, a long, weary sound that smelled of aged scotch. He set his glass down on a side table with a deliberate clink. He took a step toward her, and for the first time, Elena noticed the sheer size of the man. On television, Marcus Sterling was charming and approachable. Here, in the dim light of the hallway, he was a predator.
"Leo," Marcus said softly. The boy flinched so hard he nearly fell out of Elena's arms. "Get down. Go to the kitchen. Wait for me." "No," Elena started, but Leo was already squirming. He dropped to the floor, his bare feet slapping against the wood, and scrambled away toward the kitchen without looking back. He was more afraid of his father than he was of the cold. Elena watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned back to Marcus, ready to threaten him with the police, with the press, with anything, but Marcus raised a hand, stopping her before she could speak. "I know you're new here, Elena," he began, closing the distance between them until she could see the pores on his face, "so I'm going to overlook this hysterical outburst once, just once." "He could have died," Elena whispered, refusing to back down, though her knees felt like water. "He is weak," Marcus corrected, his voice devoid of empathy. "The world is cold, Elena. If he wants to carry the Sterling name, he needs to learn to endure discomfort. He needs to learn gratitude for the warmth he usually takes for granted." He leaned in closer. "Now, let's talk about gratitude. I hired you when no one else would. I know about the debt, Elena. I know about the medical bills for your mother and hospice. I know you are 3 missed payments away from losing your own house." Elena froze. She hadn't told the agency about the extent of her debt. "If you ever touch my son again," whispered Marcus, the smile not reaching his eyes, "or if you ever decide to share your confused opinions about my parenting with anyone, I won't just fire you. I will make sure you are blacklisted from every agency in the state. I will sue you for breach of NDA until you're living in a cardboard box and your mother is turned out onto the street. Do you understand?" The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. The grandfather clock in the foyer ticked, marking the seconds of her defeat. "Do you understand?" he repeated harder this time. "Yes," Elena choked out, looking at the floor. "Good. Now go to bed. I have to go reset the timer. Leo still owes me 40 minutes. The morning sun hit the aspen peaks with a blinding, cheerful brilliance that felt like a mockery. Inside the Sterling kitchen, a space vast enough to house a small family, Elena moved like an automaton. The smell of Ethiopian Yirgacheffe coffee beans, ground fresh by a machine that cost more than Elena's car, filled the air. It was a rich, fruity aroma that usually signaled the start of a productive day.
but today it made her stomach turn.
It was 6:30 a.m. She had not slept. Elena arranged the breakfast tray. Steel-cut oats with caramelized pears for Marcus, and a specifically requested protein smoothie for Leo. Her hands trembled as she placed the silver spoon on the napkin. She gripped the edge of the granite island, breathing through her nose, trying to steady the shaking. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, a short, sharp vibration against her hip. She knew what it was without looking, but she pulled it out anyway. Greenwood Hospice Care, second notice. Outstanding balance, $4,250. Please contact billing immediately to avoid transfer of patient. Elena stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Her mother was dying by inches, her mind slowly dissolving into the fog of dementia. The facility was the only one that accepted her state insurance, but the extras, the medication management, the physical therapy, the private room necessitated by her aggression, were out of pocket. Without this job, her mother would be moved to a state ward, a place Elena had visited once and vowed never to return to. It smelled of urine and despair. This job paid 3 times the market rate. Marcus Sterling paid for silence, for perfection, and for the ability to treat human beings like appliances. "Good morning, Elena." The voice was booming, cheerful. Elena shoved the phone back into her pocket, her heart leaping into her throat. Marcus strolled into the kitchen, dressed in a crisp navy suit, ready to conquer the business world. He looked rested. He looked vibrant. There was no trace of the monster who had stood in the dark hallway just 4 hours ago. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Elena said, her voice sounding hollow to her own ears. She poured his coffee, careful not to spill a drop. "Your oats are ready." "Excellent. Leo, come on, sport. Don't drag your feet." Leo shuffled in a moment later. The change in the boy was heartbreaking. Yesterday he had been quiet. Today he looked translucent. His skin was pale, waxy, and there were dark purple smudges under his eyes. He walked stiffly, as if his joints were rusted shut, the lingering effect of shivering on a concrete floor for hours. He didn't look at Elena. He climbed onto the high bar stool, his movements slow and pained. "Drink the smoothie, Leo," Marcus said, scrolling through emails on his tablet, not even glancing at his son. "You need the calories. You burned a lot of energy last night." Elena felt a wave of nausea so strong she had to grip the counter again. It was a sick joke to him, a game. Leo picked up the glass with both hands. His fingers were red and raw, likely chilblains from the cold. He took a sip, wincing as the cold liquid hit his throat, but he didn't complain. He just swallowed, his eyes fixed on the marble countertop. "We have the gala planning committee coming at noon," Marcus announced, taking a bite of his pears. "I need the silver polished, the guest bathroom prepped with the imported soaps, and the foyer floors rebuffed. I noticed a scuff mark near the door." He paused, looking up at Elena over the rim of his coffee cup. His eyes locked onto hers, a silent reminder of their agreement. "We want everything to look perfect, don't we, Elena? Appearances are everything." "Yes, sir," Elena whispered. "I'll take care of it." She turned back to the sink to wash a dish that was already clean, the hot water scalding her hands, grounding her. She was invisible again, just a pair of hands to scrub the floors and polish the lies. But as she scrubbed, she watched the reflection in the window. She watched the boy trying to stop his hands from shaking so he wouldn't spill his smoothie and trigger another lesson. And she realized that keeping this job to save her mother might mean watching a child die. By noon, the Sterling estate smelled of aggressive opulence. A team of florists had descended upon the foyer, filling the space with towering arrangements of white hydrangeas and Casablanca lilies. The scent was cloying, a thick, sweet perfume that masked the sterile chill of the house. Elena moved through the sea of flowers like a shadow, carrying a silver tray laden with crystal flutes of vintage champagne.
The gala planning committee had arrived. 3 women, draped in designer wool and dripping with understated diamonds, sat in the living room. They were the gatekeepers of Aspen society, women whose laughter sounded like wind chimes and whose gaze could shred a reputation in seconds. Marcus sat in the center of them, relaxed and charming, playing the role of the benevolent king. Honestly, Marcus, the theme winter warmth is just inspired, Mrs. Vanderhoven gushed, leaning forward, especially considering your work with the orphanage fund. It's so poetic. It's the least I can do, Cynthia, Marcus replied, his voice a warm baritone that vibrated with practiced humility. Every child deserves a sanctuary. I look at Leo and I'm reminded daily of how fragile these little lives are. Elena kept her head down as she offered the tray. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the silver handles. The cost of the champagne in just one of these glasses could cover her mother's physical therapy for a month. The floral arrangement in the corner cost more than her car. The disparity was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Speaking of the little prince, Cynthia clapped her hands.
Leo entered the room. He had been scrubbed and polished, dressed in a miniature version of his father's navy suit. His hair was combed flat, hiding the lack of luster from malnutrition. He walked to the center of the rug and stood with his hands clasped behind his back, exactly as he had been trained. "Hello, ladies," Leo said. His voice was steady, but Elena saw the way his eyes darted to Marcus, checking for approval, checking for safety. "Oh, look at him," another woman cooed. "He's so well behaved. You've done miracles, Marcus. I heard he was difficult when the adoption went through." "He had a lot of rough edges," Marcus said, reaching out to pat Leo's shoulder. Elena watched the contact closely. She saw the microscopic flinch in Leo's neck muscles, a reflex of pure terror that he suppressed instantly. Marcus's hand rested heavy on the boy's small frame, a gesture that looked paternal to the guests, but possessive to Elena. It was the hand of a man checking the security of his property. "Discipline and structure, that's all children really crave. Isn't that right, Leo?" "Yes, sir," Leo recited. "I am lucky to be here." "Go on now, son, finish your homework." Leo turned and marched out, his posture rigid. The women sighed in admiration. They saw a saved child. Elena saw a prisoner of war. She retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she had to set the tray down on the counter with a loud clatter. The injustice was a bitter bile in her throat. Marcus was being canonized for torturing a child, and she was serving the celebratory drinks. Needing to escape the sound of their laughter, Elena went upstairs to clean Leo's room. It was the only place in the house that felt real, perhaps because it was the locus of so much hidden pain. The room was sparse, military neatness was enforced. No toys on the floor, no posters on the walls. The bed was made with hospital corners. Elena began to strip the sheets, needing the mindless physical labor to calm her nerves. As she pulled the fitted sheet off the mattress, something fell out from between the mattress and the box spring. It was a small, leather-bound notebook. Elena froze, listening for footsteps in the hallway. Silence. She picked up the book. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. The handwriting was shaky, distinctively a child's. The pages were columns of dates and times. October 12. 4 minutes late to dinner. Porch, 20 minutes. October 14. Cried during math. No dinner. October 20. Spilled water. The closet, 1 hour. Elena flipped the pages, her horror mounting. It went back months. Every minor infraction was catalogued, every punishment recorded. It was a ledger of abuse, maintained by the victim himself. She turned to the last entry, written in shaky pencil just yesterday.
December 10. Came inside early. Reset. Elena stared at the word. Reset. Suddenly, the heavy oak door of the bedroom creaked. Elena spun around, shoving the notebook behind her. Leo was standing in the doorway, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the vent cover high on the wall, his face pale as a sheet. "He's listening," Leo whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the vent. "He put a microphone in the vent. He heard you find it." Elena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the terrifying pulse of the house itself. She stared at the innocuous metal grate of the vent high on the wall. A small, almost invisible darkness behind the slats seemed to stare back. If Marcus was listening, he had heard the rustle of paper. He had heard the gasp. He knew. "Give it to me," Elena whispered, her voice barely a breath. She snatched the leather notebook from the bedspread. There was no time to think, no time to find a clever hiding spot. She hiked up her tunic and shoved the cold, hard spine of the book into the waistband of her scrub pants against the small of her back. She pulled the uniform down and smoothed it out just as the heavy footsteps in the hallway stopped outside the door. Leo scrambled onto the bed, grabbing a textbook and opening it to a random page. He was trembling so hard the pages vibrated. The door swung open. Marcus Sterling walked in, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. But he wasn't alone. Mrs. Vanderhoven trailed behind him, her heels clicking on the hardwood, a glass of champagne still in her hand. "And here," Marcus announced, sweeping his arm across the room like a ringmaster unveiling a tiger, "is where the magic happens. We believe in a minimalist environment for Leo, a clear space for a clear mind."
Elena stood frozen by the dresser, hands clasped in front of her, trying to look invisible. The notebook pressed into her spine, a burning brand of evidence. She kept her eyes lowered, but she could feel Marcus's gaze. It wasn't the warm, charismatic look he gave the cameras. It was a tactile scan, heavy and invasive. "Oh, it's charmingly sparse," Mrs. Vanderhoven said, though her tone suggested she found it prison-like. She walked over to Leo, who didn't look up from his book. "Studying hard, sweetie?" "Yes, ma'am," Leo said robotically. Marcus strolled deeper into the room. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark in a tank. He walked straight to the bed. Elena stopped breathing. Marcus reached out and smoothed the very spot on the mattress where the notebook had been hidden seconds ago. He ran his hand over the fitted sheet, feeling the looseness where Elena had ripped it back. He paused. His fingers drummed a slow, 3-beat rhythm on the mattress. He knew. He turned slowly, his body blocking Mrs. Vanderhoven's view of Elena. The smile on his face was tight, the skin around his eyes crinkling in a way that didn't denote happiness, but calculation. He looked at the vent, then locked eyes with Elena. He tapped his earlobe once. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice dripping with synthetic pleasantness, "I believe you missed a spot." "Sir?" Elena managed to choke out. "The baseboards in the library," he said, his eyes drilling into hers. "And I think you might have accidentally picked up something that belongs to the house. A cleaning log, perhaps." Mrs. Vanderhoven laughed, oblivious to the suffocating tension. "Oh, Marcus, you are such a perfectionist. Let the poor girl breathe." "I just want everything in its right place, Cynthia," Marcus replied, never breaking eye contact with Elena. "Structure is everything. Without it, things get broken." He stepped closer to Elena, invading her personal space until she could smell the scotch on his breath beneath the mint of his mouthwash. "Go to the library, Elena. I'll join you in 10 minutes. If that item isn't on my desk when I walk in, well, I'd hate to make a call to Greenwood Hospice. I hear the state-run facilities are terribly understaffed on weekends."
Elena felt the blood drain from her face. He wasn't just threatening her job anymore. He was aiming a weapon at her dying mother.
"Go," he commanded, loud enough for Leo to flinch. Elena backed out of the room, her legs feeling like lead. As she closed the door, she saw Marcus place a hand on the back of Leo's neck, squeezing. Leo's eyes met hers through the closing crack, a silent, desperate plea for help that was cut off as the latch clicked shut. She was alone in the hallway, the notebook burning against her skin, and the clock was ticking. The library was a mausoleum of mahogany and leather, smelling of pipe tobacco and dust that had settled on books no one ever read. Elena stood in the center of the Persian rug, the silence of the room pressing against her ears like deep water. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked methodically, counting down the seconds of her life that remained her own. She had 5 minutes before Marcus arrived. Her hands were shaking so violently she nearly dropped her phone. She pulled the small leather notebook from her waistband, the cover warm from her body heat. She flipped it open on the heavy oak desk, flattening the pages with a trembling hand. The camera lens on her cheap smartphone struggled to focus in the dim amber light of the library lamps. Snap, a picture of the dates. Snap, a picture of the punishments. Snap, an entry, withheld insulin 2 hours. Wait, Elena froze. She hadn't seen that one before. She squinted at the scribbled handwriting on the page, dated 3 months ago. Leo wasn't diabetic. Why would he need insulin? Unless Marcus was using injections to keep him lethargic, to keep him compliant for the cameras? The horror of the implication made her bile rise. This wasn't just abuse, it was medical battery. The heavy brass handle of the library door turned. Elena swiped the phone off the desk and shoved it deep into her bra, the only place she prayed he wouldn't check. She smoothed her apron and clasped her hands in front of her just as the door swung open. Marcus didn't walk in, he sauntered. He had removed his suit jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his white dress shirt to reveal forearms that looked deceptively strong for a corporate executive. He carried a heavy crystal decanter of brandy in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. He kicked the door shut with his heel. He didn't have to. "Thirsty work cleaning up messes," Marcus said, placing the glasses on the desk right next to the notebook. He didn't look at the book. He looked at her. "Drink?" "No, sir." "Suit yourself." He poured a generous measure of the amber liquid, swirling it slowly. The fumes of the alcohol drifted toward her, sharp and stinging. "You have something of mine, Elena." Elena reached out and touched the notebook. It felt heavy, leaden with the pain it contained. She pushed it across the polished wood toward him. "I found it cleaning under the bed. I thought it was trash." Marcus laughed, a dry, barking sound. "Trash, yes. In a way, it is." He picked up the notebook with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. He walked over to the large stone fireplace, where a gas fire hissed quietly behind a grate. "You read it," he stated. "It wasn't a question." Elena's throat went dry. "I glanced at it." "And you think you have leverage," Marcus said, turning to face her, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his face, making his eyes look like hollow pits. "You think this little book is a weapon. You think you can take this to the police or the tabloids and bring down the great Marcus Sterling." He tossed the notebook into the fire. Elena gasped, stepping forward involuntarily. "No!" The leather cover curled instantly in the heat. The pages fanned open, the dry paper catching the flames. The ink, the record of Leo's starvation, the freezing nights, the injections, turned to ash in seconds. "It's just paper, Elena," Marcus said, watching the flames devour the evidence. "And without it, it's just the word of a bankrupt maid with a dying mother against the word of the frantic, loving father of a troubled, lying child." He took a sip of his brandy, savoring the burn.
By the way, I called Greenwood Hospice while I was upstairs. I told the administrator that I'm personally sponsoring your mother's care moving forward. I paid her balance in full for the next 6 months. Elena's knees buckled. She had to grab the back of a leather armchair to stay upright. It sounded like a gift, but she knew it was a shackle. "You bought her," Elena whispered. "You bought me," corrected Marcus, his voice dropping to a growl. "If you leave, if you talk, if you so much as look at me the wrong way, I pull the funding. And I'll ensure she's transferred to a facility where they sedate patients just to stop them from asking for water."
He walked past her toward the door, stopping just as he passed her shoulder. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "Now go upstairs. Leo has been bad again. I need you to lock him in the attic. And Elena, take his blanket. He needs to learn to self-soothe." The staircase to the attic was narrow, hidden behind a panel in the linen closet like a dirty secret. It smelled of raw pine and fiberglass insulation, a sharp chemical scent that tickled the back of Elena's throat. Every step she took creaked, the wood protesting the weight of what she was about to do. Leo walked ahead of her. He didn't need to be guided. He knew the way. At the top of the stairs, the air grew stale and significantly colder. The attic wasn't part of the estate's sophisticated climate control system. It was an unfinished cavern of rafters and plywood subflooring, illuminated by a single naked bulb that swung gently from a wire, casting shifting, nauseating shadows against the eaves. "Here," Leo said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He stopped beside a small cot set up in the corner, far away from the warmth of the chimney stack. There was no pillow, just a bare mattress ticking that looked stained and old. Elena stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her hand clutching the banister. The phone tucked inside her bra felt like a radiant stone against her skin. "I have the photos," she thought, a frantic mantra repeating in her mind. "I have the proof." But the image of Marcus's smile when he mentioned her mother's hospice bill paralyzed her. He owned her debt, which meant he owned her mother's comfort. "I have to take the blanket, Leo," Elena whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Leo didn't argue. He didn't cry. He simply unwrapped the thin fleece throw he had dragged up with him and folded it neatly. He placed it on the floor at Elena's feet. "It's okay," Leo said, climbing onto the bare cot and curling into a ball, pulling his knees to his chest. "If I don't move, I don't get as hungry." The statement shattered Elena's composure. She stepped forward, reaching out to touch his hair, but stopped herself. The camera in the bedroom had been hidden. Was there one here? Was Marcus watching from his study, sipping brandy and grating her cruelty? "I'll come back," she mouthed, exaggerating the movement of her lips so he could see, but making no sound. "I promise." Leo closed his eyes. He looked like a discard pile, a broken toy put away in the attic. Elena picked up the blanket. It was light, but it felt heavier than lead. She backed away, step by step, until she reached the door. She pulled it shut. The heavy iron slide bolt on the outside, installed recently, the metal still shiny and unoxidized, slid into place with a definitive clack that echoed through the hollow stairwell.
She was shaking uncontrollably now. She descended the stairs, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She needed to see the photos. She needed to know that the risk she took in the library was real, that she hadn't imagined the ink on those pages. She ducked into the staff bathroom on the second floor, locking the door and turning on the faucet to mask any sound. Her hands fumbled as she fished the phone from her uniform. She unlocked the screen, her thumb hovering over the gallery icon. There they were, 3 photos. The first was blurry, just a smear of handwriting. The second was clear. Oct 20, the closet, 1 hour. The third was the smoking gun. Withheld insulin. She stared at the image, zooming in until the pixels graining the handwriting were visible. It was proof of torture, proof of medical abuse. It was enough to send Marcus Sterling to prison for a decade. The phone vibrated in her hand, startling her so bad she nearly dropped it into the sink. It was a text message, unknown number. Elena's stomach dropped. She opened the message. It was a photograph. The image was grainy, taken in low light. It showed an elderly woman sleeping in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV drip. Her mouth was open, her gray hair fanned out on the pillow. It was her mother. And in the foreground of the photo, resting on the bedside table next to her mother's water cup, was a familiar object, a silver cufflinks box embossed with the letter S. A second message bubbled up below the photo. She looks peaceful. Let's keep her that way. Get back to work, Elena. Elena sank to the floor, the cold tile pressing against her legs. He wasn't just paying the bills. He had someone inside the hospice. He could reach her mother anytime, anywhere. The photos on her phone weren't leverage anymore. They were a death sentence. Elena splashed freezing water onto her face, gasping as the shock hit her skin. In the mirror, her reflection looked fractured, water droplets distorting the terror in her eyes. The image of her mother, vulnerable and asleep, with Marcus's cufflinks on her bedside table, was burned into her retinas. It was a message clearer than any spoken threat. I can touch her whenever I want.
She dried her face with a rough paper towel, scratching her skin red. She had to go back out there. She had to serve dinner. She had to pretend she wasn't screaming on the inside. When she stepped into the hallway, the house was silent again. The heavy velvet curtains had been drawn, shutting out the snow and the night. Elena. She jumped. Marcus was standing at the entrance to his study, leaning against the doorframe. He held a small silver key between his thumb and forefinger. "Sir?" "Leo needs his medication," Marcus said. His voice was calm, reasonable. "Since you are so concerned with his well-being, I've decided to entrust you with this responsibility." He tossed the key. It tumbled through the air, glinting in the chandelier light, and landed at her feet. Elena stared at it. "Pick it up," he commanded softly. Elena bent down, her fingers brushing the cold hardwood. She grasped the key. "The wall safe behind the painting in my study," Marcus instructed. "Bring me the blue pouch. And Elena, don't drop it. The contents are fragile." Elena walked into the study, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. She moved the heavy oil painting of a hunting scene, hounds tearing into a fox, to reveal the steel safe. Her hand trembled as she inserted the key and turned it. The tumblers clicked, a sound like bones snapping. Inside, sitting on a stack of cash, was a blue zippered pouch. It looked like a diabetic's travel kit. Elena unzipped it. Inside were several vials of clear liquid and a handful of syringes. She picked up a vial, holding it up to the desk lamp. Humalog, insulin Lispro, 100 units per milliliter. The room spun. Leo wasn't diabetic. She had seen his medical forms when she filed them last week. His blood sugar was normal. Then she understood. The lethargy, the shaking, the sweating, the confusion. Marcus wasn't just starving him. He was injecting him with insulin to crash his blood sugar. He was inducing hypoglycemia. It kept the boy weak, compliant, and physically dependent. It was how he kept Leo calm for the cameras. It was Munchausen by proxy, weaponized for control. It's ingenious, isn't it? Marcus was standing right behind her. She hadn't heard him move. "He has so much excess energy," Marcus whispered, looking over her shoulder at the vial. "This helps him focus. It teaches him the value of rest." "This could kill him," Elena said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "If you give him too much, he could go into a coma." "I never give him too much. I am precise, Elena. I am a perfectionist. You know that." He reached out and took the vial from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. His skin was warm, dry, and terrifyingly steady. "Draw up 5 units. Bring it to the attic." "I can't," she breathed. "Your mother," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "I wonder if the night nurse at the hospice checks on her patients often. It would be a tragedy if someone unplugged something, or if she simply slipped away in the dark." Elena felt a tear, hot and sharp, slide down her cheek. The trap was shut. The teeth were dug in. 5 units, Marcus repeated. "Don't make me ask again." With shaking hands, Elena uncapped the syringe. She pierced the rubber stopper of the vial. She drew back the plunger, watching the clear poison fill the chamber. She was no longer just a witness. She was an accomplice. "Good girl," Marcus purred. "Now, let's go say good night to our son." He turned and walked toward the linen closet door that hid the attic stairs. Elena followed, the syringe in her hand, the needle pointing up like a tiny silver accusatory finger. As they climbed the stairs into the freezing darkness of the attic, Elena heard a sound that made her blood turn to ice. It wasn't whimpering, it wasn't crying. It was the wet, rhythmic rasp like sandpaper being dragged across concrete. It was the sound of air struggling to bypass a throat that was closing down. Elena dropped the blue pouch. The vials of insulin skittered across the raw plywood floor, clinking together like marbles. She didn't care. She fell to her knees beside the cot, her hands hovering over Leo's small, rigid body. His eyes were rolled back in his head, showing only the whites, and his lips were a terrifying shade of violet. His skin felt like marble, cold, hard, and waxy. "He's seizing!" Elena screamed, her voice cracking. "He's in hypoglycemic shock! Look at him!" Marcus stood at the foot of the cot, his silhouette looming large against the single swinging light bulb. He didn't look horrified. He looked annoyed. He looked at his watch, then back at the boy.
"He's acting out," Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. He took a step closer, peering down at the foam gathering at the corner of Leo's mouth. "Leo, stop this immediately. It's undignified." "He can't hear you! He's dying!" Elena grabbed Leo's wrist. The pulse was thready, fluttering like a trapped moth. "We need an ambulance! Now! Call 911!" She reached for her pocket, for her phone, but Marcus moved with terrifying speed. He kicked her hand away from her hip, his polished Oxford shoe connecting hard with her wrist. Elena yelped, cradling her arm. "No ambulances," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Do you have any idea what happens if paramedics walk up here? Do you know what they will see? The bruises, the needle marks, the temperature of this room." "He will die if we don't!" Elena shouted, looking up at him, tears streaming down her face. "He is 7 years old!" Marcus looked at the boy, then at the insulin vial scattered on the floor. A calm, dark calculation washed over his face. He adjusted his cufflinks. "Perhaps," Marcus started slowly, "perhaps that is for the best." The air left the room. Elena stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "He was always defective," Marcus murmured, speaking as if he were discussing a car with a bad transmission. "If he dies tonight, it's a tragedy, a congenital heart defect, the grieving father. The foundation donations will triple in his memory." He looked at Elena, his eyes dead. "If he lives and the authorities come, I lose everything.
And if I lose everything, Elena, your mother loses her machine. She loses her bed. She dies in pain, screaming." He took a step back toward the door. "Fix it yourself if you can, but if you call for help, I will make sure your mother is evicted from the hospice within the hour." "You're a monster," Elena whispered. The fear that had paralyzed her for days suddenly evaporated, burned away by a white-hot fury. "I won't let him die." "Then you better hope you have magic hands," Marcus sneered. He stepped out of the attic. The heavy door slammed shut. The slide bolt shrieked into place. Clack! Elena was alone in the freezing dark, trapped with a dying child. She scrambled to Leo, slapping his cheeks. "Leo! Leo, wake up!"
He arched his back, a silent convulsion seizing his spine. He needed sugar, pure, fast-acting glucose, now. Elena patted her pockets frantically. Nothing, just the phone and the lint of her uniform. She looked around the attic. Dust, insulation, wooden beams, nothing. She grabbed Leo's shoulders, shaking him. "Leo, did you hide food? Leo!" He didn't answer. The rattling in his chest was getting quieter, not because he was better, but because he was too weak to breathe. Elena ripped off her apron. She tore through the pockets. A pen, a hair tie, a crumpled tissue. And then her fingers brushed against something stiff and crinkly in the deepest corner of the fabric. She pulled it out. It was 2 packets of raw sugar. She had absent-mindedly shoved them into her pocket when clearing the coffee service for the gala committee that morning. She tore the paper packets open with her teeth, the granules spilling onto her chin. She used one hand to pry Leo's jaw open, forcing his mouth apart. She poured the sugar under his tongue, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years that the mucous membranes would absorb it fast enough. "Come on," she sobbed, rubbing his throat to stimulate a swallow reflex. "Come on, baby. Don't let him win. Don't you dare let him win." She pulled him off the cot, dragging his limp body toward the chimney stack, the only source of heat in the room. She wrapped her body around his, sharing every ounce of warmth she had. She checked his pulse again. It was slowing down. The sugar hit Leo's system like a spark in a damp engine. It wasn't a roar of life, but a sputter, a cough, a gag, and then the slow, groggy return of consciousness. His eyelids fluttered, the violet hue of his lips fading to a pale, ghostly pink. He curled tighter into Elena's chest, his breathing settling from the terrifying death rattle into a shallow, exhausted rhythm. "Elena?" he voiced, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "Is it time for the timer?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She pressed her cheek against the top of his head, feeling the residual clamminess of the sweat that had soaked his hair. The rage that had flared in her moments ago had cooled into something harder, denser. It felt like a stone in her gut. "No timer, Leo," she said, her voice steady. "The timer is broken." She looked around their prison. The attic was a tomb. The single light bulb swayed in the draft, casting long, swinging shadows that looked like hanging men. The cold was a physical weight now, pressing against her eardrums, seeping through the floorboards. She pulled her phone out. No service. The thick insulation and the slate roof of the estate had turned the attic into a dead zone. Marcus knew this. He had calculated every variable. She looked at the screen of her phone, at the photo of her mother sleeping in the hospice bed. For weeks, that image had been her leash. Marcus had used her love as a weapon, twisting it until she was choking on it. But as she sat on the freezing floor, holding a boy who had almost been murdered by his own father, the leash snapped. If she died here, her mother died. If she went to prison, her mother died. If she stayed silent, Leo died. The equation had simplified. There was no safe option anymore.
There was only the option that ended Marcus Sterling. "Can you stand?" Elena asked, pulling back. Leo blinked, his eyes glassy. I think so, but the door is locked." "We aren't going out the door." Elena stood up, her legs stiff. She scanned the room, ignoring the biting cold. She needed a weakness. Every house had one. She moved to the chimney stack, running her hands over the rough brick. It was warm. The gas fireplaces downstairs were roaring, but the masonry was solid. She moved to the eaves, where the roof sloped down to meet the floor. The wind whistled louder here. She crouched, feeling a draft. There was a gap in the insulation. She pulled at the pink fiberglass batting, coughing as dust filled the air. Behind the insulation, near the floor, was a small, square ventilation grate. It was old, painted over a dozen times, rusted at the corners. She put her eye to the slates. She couldn't see anything but darkness, but she could hear. Clink, clink, the sound of silverware. Thump, the sound of a heavy bass line being tested. The ballroom. They were directly above the ballroom. Elena said, turning back to him. She walked over and picked up the blue zipper pouch. She gathered every single vial of insulin from the floor, counting them. 6 vials, enough to kill a horse, enough to send a man to prison for life. She shoved the pouch into her pocket. "Can we get out?" Leo asked, his teeth beginning to chatter again.
Elena walked to the corner of the room, where a stack of old paint cans sat, covered in a dropcloth. She grabbed a heavy, hardened can of primer. "I need you to be brave, Leo, braver than you've ever been." She returned to the vent. She hefted the paint can. "Marcus thinks we're freezing," she whispered, a grim smile touching her lips. "He thinks we're weak. He thinks we're going to just go to sleep and never wake up." She swung the can. Crack! The cast iron of the grate held, but the wood around it splintered. "But we aren't going to sleep," she grunted, swinging again. Crack! The grate loosened, dry rot giving way to brute force. "We are going to the party." With a final desperate heave, the grate gave way, falling into the darkness of the crawl space between the attic floor and the ballroom ceiling. A rush of warm, stale air blasted into the attic, carrying the scent of expensive lilies and floor wax. Elena peered into the hole. It was a tight squeeze, a narrow duct system that ran through the false ceiling. It was dangerous, it was dusty, but it led down. She turned to Leo, extending her hand. "Come on," she said. "It's time to crash the gala." The grand ballroom of the Sterling estate was a masterpiece of deception. Under the crystal chandeliers, 200 of Aspen's elite sipped vintage Cabernet and applauded polite lies. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, truffle oil, and heavy floral perfumes, a suffocating blanket of wealth that masked the rot at the foundation of the house. Marcus Sterling stood at the podium, bathed in a warm spotlight. He looked every inch the grieving, saintly father. He adjusted the microphone, his face a mask of practiced sorrow. "I had hoped my son Leo could be here tonight to hand out the awards," Marcus said, his voice catching perfectly in his throat. A collective, sympathetic sigh swept through the room. "But, as many of you know, his constitution is fragile. He is resting upstairs, fighting a battle most of us can't imagine." 20 feet above him, in the suffocating darkness of the drop-ceiling crawl space, Elena dragged her body over rough wooden joists. The space was a claustrophobic nightmare. It smelled of ancient dust, rat droppings, and the metallic tang of heating ducts. Elena's elbows were scraped raw, her uniform torn and blackened with soot. Behind her, Leo crawled on his hands and knees. He was moving on sheer adrenaline now, the sugar having given him just enough energy to keep his eyes open, though his breathing was jagged and loud in the confined space.
"Quiet, Leo," Elena whispered, though the booming sound of Marcus's voice through the floorboards masked their movements. "He's lying," Leo whimpered, peering through a gap in the drywall where a light fixture was mounted. "He's telling them I'm sick." "He's digging his own grave," Elena hissed. She army-crawled forward, ignoring the splinter that drove itself deep into her palm. She needed to find the main vent, the one directly above the stage, the one that was purely decorative, a large iron grate that hadn't been screwed down since the house was built in the 20s. Below, Marcus continued his performance. "It is for children like Leo, broken, discarded, unloved, that we built the sterling foundation," Marcus bellowed, raising a glass. "We provide structure, we provide warmth, we provide a future." "Hypocrite," Elena spat. They reached the central grate. It was a heavy, ornate square of cast iron, about 2 feet wide. Through the scrollwork, Elena could see the top of Marcus's head. She could see the white tablecloths, the diamonds glittering on necks, the reporters with their cameras poised near the back of the room. The heat rising from the ballroom was intense, a blast of hot, food-scented air that made Elena dizzy. "Leo," Elena whispered, grabbing the boy's hand. "Do you trust me?" Leo looked at the drop. It was a 12-foot fall to the stage floor. It would hurt, but looking at his father below, a strange, hard light entered the boy's eyes. He nodded. "When we land," Elena instructed, her voice trembling, "don't hide. Let them see you. Let them see the pajamas. Let them see the bruises." She positioned herself on the edge of the joist. She hooked her fingers into the iron grate. It was heavy, but adrenaline is a powerful drug. "On 3, she whispered. Below, Marcus raised his hands for the finale of his speech. "So tonight, let us open our hearts. Let us open our wallets. Let us give everything for the children." 1, Elena counted. "To the children," the crowd toasted. 2.
Marcus smiled, basking in the adoration. "Thank you. You are all too kind." 3. Elena kicked the latch mechanism with her heel and threw her entire body weight onto the grate. The rusty iron gave way with a shriek of tearing metal that cut through the applause like a scream. The grate, Elena, and Leo plummeted from the ceiling. They didn't land gracefully. They crashed onto the long table of hors d'oeuvres set up just behind the podium. Crystal platters shattered, silverware flew, a tower of champagne glasses exploded in a shower of glittering shards and foam. The room went dead silent. Marcus spun around, dropping his microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening screech of feedback. Lying amidst the ruin of the banquet, covered in drywall dust, soot, and crab cakes, Elena groaned and pushed herself up. She looked like a demon rising from the underworld. Beside her, Leo shivered violently, his thin, filthy pajamas stark against the white tablecloths. Elena grabbed a surviving champagne flute and smashed it against the table edge, creating a jagged glass shiv. She stood up, pulling Leo with her, and pointed the broken glass directly at Marcus Sterling's heart. "You want to talk about warmth, Marcus?" she screamed, her voice raw and terrifying. "Let's talk about the attic." The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a vacuum where the air had been sucked out by pure shock. 200 faces, the crème de la crème of society, stared up at the stage. They looked at the shattered table, the ruined hors d'oeuvres, and the 2 figures covered in attic dust and blood. Elena stood like a cornered animal, the jagged stem of the champagne flute held steady in her hand. Beside her, Leo was a ghost. In the unforgiving glare of the spotlight, the truth of his condition was undeniable. Without the tailored suits and the stage makeup, he looked like a famine victim. His cheekbones protruded sharply, his skin was a translucent map of blue veins, his lips were still tinged with the violet of hypothermia. "Security!" Marcus roared, his voice cracking. The benevolent mask shattered instantly, revealing the snarling face of a man losing control. "She's crazy! She kidnapped him! Get her off the stage!" 2 burly men in black suits started toward the podium, pushing past a stunned senator and his wife. "Stay back!" Elena screamed, swinging the glass shard. "Look at him! Look at your perfect father's son!"
She grabbed Leo's arm, gently but firmly, and shoved his sleeve up. Under the harsh stage lights, the bruises were black and purple against the pale skin, and there, dotting his upper arm, were dozens of tiny red puncture marks. "He tells you Leo is fragile," Elena shouted, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "He tells you he has a heart condition, but look!" She reached into her pocket and pulled out the blue zipper pouch. She ripped it open and dumped the contents onto the stage floor. The vials of insulin bounced and rolled, catching the light. "Insulin!" Elena yelled. "Leo isn't diabetic. Check his medical records. Marcus injects him to make him weak, to keep him quiet, to make him a prop for your donations." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones were out now. 100 cameras were recording, live streaming the downfall of Aspen's golden boy. "Lies!" Marcus lunged forward, ignoring the glass. "She's a drug addict, a thief. She's trying to extort me." He reached for Leo. "Come here, son. Come to Daddy. She's hurting you." It was the moment of truth. Leo stood between the woman who had saved him and the man who owned him. Marcus's hand was outstretched, that same heavy hand that had squeezed his shoulder earlier, the hand that locked the attic door. Leo didn't walk to him. Leo flinched. He let out a high, keening sound of pure terror and buried his face in Elena's dusty, soot-stained uniform. "No!" Leo screamed, the sound amplified by the dropped microphone still live on the floor. "Don't put me in the cold! I don't want to go back to the cold!" The accusation hung in the air, more damning than any physical evidence. Mrs. Vanderhoven, standing in the front row, dropped her glass. It shattered, the sound punctuating the verdict. "He's freezing," she whispered, her voice carrying in the silence. "Marcus, the boy is freezing." Marcus froze. He looked at the crowd. He saw the disgust on their faces. He saw the cameras. He saw the end. "You ungrateful little brat! After everything I bought you!" "That's enough, Mr. Sterling."
The voice came from the side of the stage. The chief of police, a guest at the gala, stepped up onto the platform. He wasn't smiling. He signaled to the security guards, who stopped advancing on Elena and turned, slowly, toward Marcus. "I think we need to have a conversation about these vials," the chief said, his hand resting on his holster, "and about why your son looks like he just walked out of a war zone." Marcus backed away, his eyes darting to the exit signs. "You can't touch me. Do you know who I am? I pay your salary. I own this town." Elena lowered the broken glass. Her arm was shaking, the adrenaline finally crashing. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a small, pathetic man whose power had just evaporated. "You don't own anything anymore," she said softly. The flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light storm as the chief of police placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. The winter warmth gala had finally delivered on its promise. The cold was gone, replaced by the scorching heat of justice. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was softer than Elena expected. It wasn't a dramatic clang, but a series of dry, mechanical clicks that signaled the end of an empire. Marcus Sterling didn't go quietly. As the officers marched him through the ruined ballroom, stepping over the smashed champagne flutes and trampled hors d'oeuvres, he screamed. He threatened lawsuits. He fired staff who weren't even there. He invoked the names of governors and senators. But the room, usually so eager to hang on his every word, turned its back. The spell was broken. The perfect dad was just a man in a soiled suit, dragged away into the snow he had used as a weapon. Elena sat on the edge of the stage, a paramedic draping a heavy thermal blanket over her shoulders. She pulled Leo into the cocoon with her. He was drinking a cup of hot chocolate, holding it with both hands, the steam rising to kiss his face. He took small, reverent sips as if tasting magic. "Is he gone, baby?"
Elena asked, his voice barely a whisper over the commotion of the police radios. "He's gone, baby," Elena said, pressing a kiss to his dusty hair. "He's never coming back." A shadow fell over them. It was the police chief, accompanied by Mrs. Vanderhoven. The socialite looked shaken, her mascara running, the facade of untouchable wealth cracked by the reality of what she had witnessed. "Miss Torres," the chief said, his tone respectful. "We have units at the hospice. We found the orderly Marcus had on his payroll. She's in custody. Your mother is safe. We've placed a guard at her door, just in case." Elena let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a month. The leverage was gone. Her mother was safe.
Mrs. Vanderhoven stepped forward, wringing her diamond-clad hands. I saw the room," she stammered, looking at Leo. "I saw the lock on the door. I made a joke about it. I didn't know." "You didn't look," Elena said simply. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. People like you never look too closely at the help. Mrs. Vanderhoven flinched, but she nodded. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a card, writing a number on the back with a trembling hand. "I am the chair of the hospital board," she said. "I am going to make sure Leo gets the best care possible, no expenses, and your mother, I will personally see to it that her bills are covered at Greenwood, indefinitely." She looked at Elena, her eyes pleading for absolution. "It's the least I can do. Please, let me fix this." Elena looked at the card, then at Leo. The boy was finally warm. His color was returning. He wasn't shaking. "Do it," Elena said, taking the card. "But Leo stays with me. I'm the only one who knows how he takes his tea." 3 hours later, the chaos of the gala was a distant memory. Elena sat in a private hospital room, the soft beep of the heart monitor the only sound in the darkness. It was a good sound, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of life. Leo was asleep in the bed, buried under 3 thick, heated blankets. He looked small, but for the first time since she had met him, he looked peaceful. There were no timers ticking down, no cold drafts, no hunger pains. Elena leaned back in the recliner next to the bed, her body aching with exhaustion, but her spirit light. She watched the rise and fall of his chest. The Winter Warmth Gala had raised millions that night, but not for the Sterling Foundation. The scandal would destroy Marcus, liquidate his assets, and shatter his legacy. But in this quiet, sterile room, Elena found the only warmth that mattered. Leo stirred, opening one eye sleepily. "Elena? I'm here. Is the door locked?" "Yes," Elena smiled, reaching out to hold his hand. "But this time, the lock is on the inside. No one can get in to hurt you." Leo sighed, a long, contented sound, and closed his eyes. "Okay. Good night, Elena." "Good night, Leo." Outside, the snow continued to fall on Aspen, burying the secrets of the Sterling estate in white. But inside, everything was finally perfectly warm.